Welcome everybody to tonight's presentation by Save the Sound and Save Mattituck Inlet. My name is Louise Harrison. I work for Save the Sound as the Long Island Natural Areas Manager. Save the Sound leads environmental action in the Long Island Sound region. We fight climate change, save endangered lands, protect the Sound and its rivers, and we work with nature to restore ecosystems. For several decades, I have been involved in environmental review under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or SEQRA. You'll hear me say SEQRA a lot tonight. During my past tenure in New York State agencies, as a principal environmental analyst at the Suffolk County Department of Health Services, Office of Ecology, as an environmental nonprofit executive director in Nassau County, and working with a community in Suffolk County in a long-term effort to protect a nature preserve from excavation of a forest right next to its boundary, and more. I have familiarity with SEQRA from many angles. I'm not a lawyer, and I am not giving legal advice. I am, however, here tonight to encourage you to use this law's provisions to express your concerns about impacts on the environment. Tonight, we have an opportunity to talk about the regional impact of a project in Mattituck, New York, along Mattituck Creek, also known as Mattituck Inlet. This is a real life case study with public review now underway. You'll hear about the proposed development from members of a community near the project site. They'll present it as they have learned it and have learned its details from a draft environmental impact statement, and they'll provide their perspective. I'd like to introduce the co-chairs of Save Mattituck Inlet, Anne Sherwood Pundyk and Stephen Boscola. But before I do, we have some housekeeping to do, and I am going to ask Kathy Sepiel from Save the Sound to let our listeners tonight know some of these details.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We're really glad you're here. Just a couple of things I want to note. At the bottom of your screen, you should see an icon that says Q&A, and we'll be collecting questions there throughout the presentation. So if you think of something as our panelists are speaking, feel free to click on the Q&A and leave your question. We'll be curating those and giving them to the panelists to answer at the end of the presentation this evening. And I also just want to point out that we are recording. So first of all, it's good for you to know that. But second of all, we will be sending a link to the recording of this webinar to all of the participants, all of the attendees next week. And that's sort of frees you up not to have to take a lot of notes, but to be able to sit back and listen and digest the information as you're hearing it this evening. And then you'll be able to watch this presentation again if you'd like to. We'll have that out to you sometime next week. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Stephen and Anne and Louise.
Thanks, Kathy. Now I'd like to introduce Anne Sherwood Pundyk and Stephen Boscola from Save Mattituck Inlet.
Hello, I'm Anne Sherwood Pundyk, and I'm here to talk about our group Save Mattituck Inlet, why we formed, the current focus of our group, and its relevance to the entire North Fork community.
And I'm Stephen Boscola, born and raised in Mattituck, neighbors with Anne. And the information that we're presenting in our presentation is largely from the developer's DEIS. And so, we've done some of our own calculations and analyses based on that information. But this is all information that's publicly available on the Southold Town Planning Board's website.
We've been a group. We're a group of all volunteer community members, neighbors. We've been working together for just about 3 years. And the reason why we came together was the Southold Town Planning Board reviewed a project, Strong's Marine Boat Storage Project, which is you'll hear more about it in detail, located on Mattituck Inlet. And after reviewing the project submitted by the developer in August of 2020, the town planning board made a positive declaration of significance, which meant that there was concern about potential environmental impacts of a concerning nature. So that brought the project to our attention. We began to educate ourselves about the details and also this process, the SEQRA process that Louise mentioned. So, you know, as an activist group, we've our main goal is raising awareness about the project. It's really important for people to know that it's even happening. And then to invite people to delve into the details and begin to understand it. And we've really learned that it's a complex project. Some projects are more straightforward. You know, a hotel off a main road, but this is a project that's situated both on the water's edge. Includes a hillside, a nature preserve. The timing is complicated, so that's something to keep in mind as we talk about the project.
Right. So let's jump in here. So our current focus is at the Strong's Yacht Center, and this is about a mile south of the Mattituck Inlet opening, which leads towards Mattituck Creek. Mattituck Inlet is the only federal navigable waterway east of Mount Sinai on the Long Island Sound side of Long Island, and so it makes it a regional resource, and it holds a lot of significance, you know, for both locally here in Mattituck, but then also, you know, the region in general. So again, this is another picture of the site here and sort of what is being proposed. These two large warehouses. The developer is looking to store an additional 88, roughly 60-foot yachts in these indoor heated storage buildings. Just the next slide here. And so here's the main key factors here. So in order to build these two massive storage units, what has to happen is this area in red here, which is about a 4-acre mature forest that abuts the Mill Road Preserve. We'll get to the preserve in a moment. This area here contains 630 mature trees, and those trees, that's everything over 6 inches in diameter. So first, they would have to take out this entire forest and then excavate this entire hillside. And at its top here, it's a roughly 50-foot elevation. It would be removed down to about a 10-foot elevation. This constitutes 134,000 cubic yards of sand. And then the two buildings would be set in here after a retaining wall. An 875-foot long retaining wall would hold back this slope cut. Total storage on the property right now is roughly 69,000 square foot. This would add an additional 101,000 square feet. And to just put that into context, these two buildings here, these new buildings would be roughly 4.5 times the size of these two buildings and be 17 foot higher. So they're 45-foot tall buildings and then set on a 10-foot elevation. So the height from the base to the top of the ridge would be over 55 feet tall. The Mill Road Preserve here is a town-owned preserve. And so our main concern here is that there is a natural buffer here that would suddenly disappear if you take out this entire stretch here. The owner of the marina also owns this property here. And so, but what you'll see is that the parcel in question is the mature forest. And that's something that we're taking, you know, extremely seriously, as well as the sand removal. So as we look at the DEIS and as we give our comments, things for folks to think about, we're going to highlight some of our concerns here. They're not all of our concerns. We have many. This is just a small subset. The preserve itself was preserved by the town of Southold in 2002 using community funds. It's home to nearly 70 species of birds. There's been some endangered. The northern long-eared bat has been in and around this property. There's some other significant identified species that have inhabited here, including the box turtle. And so this is something that we're extremely focused on. If folks have ever been in this preserve, it's a spectacular place to come visit. And it really is a significant a piece of our town.
So as far as negative and irreversible impacts to the ecology, this photograph, by the way, is a project that's very similar to Strong's Marine Boat Storage, where there was an excavation and the forest was destroyed. However, this is only half. The picture shows the project that's only half the size of what would happen along Mattituck Creek. I think to take a little step back, we know on the North Fork that last fall, all the civics got together and did an extensive survey of the community in terms of what was important to them. And we learned that the top priority for more than 90% of our community is the preservation of natural habitats. So this is a value that we have as a community on the North Fork. And so to look at this project that, as Stephen mentioned, over 600 mature trees, many more smaller trees will be removed. And the effect is it's going to reduce the total amount of forest cover in our area. It's also a destruction of the forest community and wildlife, as Stephen mentioned, and endangered species. And of course, the loss of carbon sequestration in our town. The excavation of the whole hillside, 134,000 cubic yards of sand, just really makes no sense in the face of what we know to be the importance of coastal resilience, where we know there's sea level rise happening. So this is, there's a natural, stable hillside along the water's edge. It's going to be destroyed, and the impacts are hard to even imagine with respect to sea level rise.
So another concern of ours, which has been expanded to sort of a regional concern as well, is the impact of traffic. In order to haul 134,000 cubic yards of sand, you need 4,500 of these 22-wheel dump truck tractor trailers. That's 4,500 full, and so every full truck has to come in empty. So a total of 9,000 truck trips would be in this neighborhood, in a residential neighborhood, 5 days a week during school hours from 7 to 5. And it's just going to exacerbate, and we already have traffic issues in this region. And so this is just going to make things, significantly worse for folks on the North Fork and certainly a little bit west on Long Island. It's one truck every about 7 minutes. There would be a dump truck going by. The truck route, which is what sort of expands into our regional discussion, would leave the site here at the inlet. It would come up to Sound Avenue here on the North Fork, and then head down towards Northville Turnpike and out towards Riverhead off of Route 58 past the hospital and out by, if you folks are familiar with the North Fork, it would head out towards the Long Island Expressway. We still don't know exactly where the sand is going. And we didn't actually have this map until the second DEIS. The first DEIS was deemed inadequate for public review. The second DEIS that came out actually had the truck route. So we try to give folks as much information as we get, as quickly as we get it. One of the concerns with this truck route here is along Sound Avenue are historic structures. And these are buildings that are at significant risk because of their age, their type of construction. Sometimes they don't have poured foundations. And what you'll see here in green are structures that are eligible for the State National Register of Historic Places. The ones in yellow are ones that are already listed. And what we've been learning is that specifically the Halleckville property has already had damage caused to it. I think a ceiling has collapsed based on truck traffic. the vibration, the noise. These are our concerns with this amount of trucks going through these neighborhoods. A fully loaded dump truck tractor trailer would weigh about 107,000 pounds. So that truck going past these structures, which are significantly close to the road, could have major issues from the vibration. One thing that we wanted to point out to folks in the DEIS is that this truck here, this dump truck, and this Amazon delivery truck are considered the same truck. And so when they say incremental additive truck traffic, they're classifying these two as the same. They're clearly not the same. And that's one of the things that we're trying to make sure that folks are aware of, is that, you know, this is a significant truck to put on a narrow stretch of road. And again, these trucks will be racing up and down here during school drop-off and pickup times, 7 a.m. to 5 a.m. That's multiple drop-offs, multiple pickups each day, and it would be Monday through Friday. Again, this just shows the existing uses of these neighborhood roads. Folks are out here with strollers, pedestrians are on bicycles, and as we can see here in the wintertime, which is when this is scheduled to take place, should there be a snow event, the roads are only going to get even narrower. So trying to have two dump trucks passing with pedestrians, it could be a serious situation.
In the DEIS, there's a category of concern that's called community character, which I think is something we can all relate to and understand. And there's ways of, looking at it and breaking it down. So for example, these images, which are provided by the developer of the two yacht storage buildings, show, they're oversized projects. I don't know, there's several ways you can sort of think about, try and understand the scale, because they are, by and large, we believe they would be the largest buildings on the North Fork and in Southold. One of them is 52,500 square feet. The second is 49,000 square feet. So together they're the size of 1 3/4 football fields. They're set in the excavated hillside that we talked about before, and there's a 875-foot long retaining wall that has to be built to keep the hillside in place around them. So one reference is in Riverhead, the Hobby Lobby store, big box store. These would be the same as two Hobby Lobby stores. And I think if you'll notice, there's a small arrow, a red arrow to a small white door. That is the size of a person. So you can extrapolate from that size of the door in terms of how big the rest of the building is. So we have the two large buildings, the excavated hillside, the retaining wall. And we saw a picture a couple slides ago of the winter weather, the snow built up. Back to the point about how this is a complex project, it's, with any project with this amount of different aspects to it, anything that could impact the construction schedule, weather, the economy, supply chain, availability of resources. So the project schedule that's put into the DEIS, limiting, the 3 phases of construction, it's hard to imagine that there won't be an impact on that, and that they will be in fact extended beyond the time that's estimated. I think as far as the oversized buildings, this is something that might set a precedent for other areas on the North Fork. So that's something to, be concerned about. This is another drawings provided by the developer in terms of the showing the scale, and in that the building is set into the hillside. There's been some reference that these are similar to the small, barns that are set into the farmlands to store potatoes, but there's really, no resemblance at all. They're nearly 4 stories high. They're combined 101,500 square feet, as I mentioned.
And so another concern that we wanted to touch on for folks is the dangers due to fire. And if folks have been seeing on the news lately, there seems to have been an uptick in the number of storage building fires at very professionally run marinas. It's something that's not particularly addressed in the DEIS, but it's something that we as community members and neighbors have. And again, these being probably 2 of the largest buildings on the North Fork, we need to make sure that folks are aware of the serious nature of this, as other fire departments could be called in or would be called in to help fight a fire should something happen. Again, these buildings are heated with 8,000 gallons of propane. So they're not just sitting dormant once these boats go into the buildings. There are going to be, there's going to be activity in there. Storing 60-foot yachts. Each yacht would hold several hundred gallons of fuel. So if they're trying to store 88 60-foot yachts, take all that fuel, add it together, that's going to be in those sheds. And typically these marinas recommend that boats be full of fuel when they go into them. The boats are typically made of fiberglass, about all of them would be. And fiberglass burns very hot, very quickly with thick black smoke. And so, we want folks to be aware of, there's chemicals that could be stored in here, the propane, and just the nature of what's being stored in them. These boats have electrical systems, there are batteries in them. There are things that could go wrong here.
So Louise is going to get into this next part of our talk in more detail, but just in terms of where we are now, this is what I think of as go time in terms of having the community, having everyone who might have a concern about this project to make their voice heard. So there will be a public hearing on May 15th where everyone is welcome to come and speak in person about their concerns. There's other ways as well to communicate in writing to the town planning department and board about your concerns.
And so I want to just give folks, in case you're not aware of how, so there's a planning board and there's a planning department. The 5 department members advise the board. And what we found is that there's been a run on the North Fork lately with development and some major projects being proposed. And so that's one of the reasons why we feel we're helping support the planning board in their review of this DEIS as they try to navigate these and assess these projects concurrently. Strong Storage Building is a gigantic project. The Mattituck Hotel is a proposed hotel and water park in the town of Mattituck. There's another resort that was being proposed at the Boscola Bay Winery site in Cutchogue. And then we had a battery storage project, which has, I think, been put on pause at the moment. And so, your input on the DEIS is essential, to help the department in this review. Just the base DEIS is 369 pages, I believe it is, with all the appendices. It's a massive document. It is broken up into separate segments, which I'm sure Louise will touch on. But again, we feel that the planning board is a small department and they're pretty overworked lately, I think.
To that point, this process of undergoing the environmental review is really, it requires the community to get involved and voice their concerns. It's a partnership between the town planning board and the community. So, as I mentioned, over the last 3 years, we've done quite a bit of work to raise awareness. People can, learn about the project, make their own, have their own opinion, form their own opinion after they read and get informed. So, we've done different ways of outreach. We've partnered with other environmental groups such as Save the Sound. North Fork Environmental Council and the North Fork Audubon Society. We've gotten the word out through letters to the editor, which is something, you know, everyone is welcome to do. And through the course of raising awareness, we've been really gratified that, you know, over 3,300 people have signed the petition saying they object to the project. So we feel we've been able to reach quite a few people. And some of the mechanisms are, we have a blue ribbon awareness campaign. You might see them tied to, mailboxes or fence posts. If anyone would like a blue ribbon, we'll be happy to get you one. We found that recreational kayakers from really all across Long Island who value the beauty of the Mattituck Inlet came and voiced their concerns as well. And this is a picture of them from last July.
And so, if you want to get involved, we'd love to, the more the merrier. Louise Harrison is going to get into the SEQRA and commenting on the DEIS. But if you want to get involved with Save Mattituck Inlet, our Gmail is there. We have a website, SaveMattituckInlet.com. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. And, if folks have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to us, anytime. And with that, I'll turn it over to Louise Harrison.
Thank you, Anne and Stephen. It's been my pleasure and it's been inspiring to work with you both and the rest of the Save Mattituck Inlet members for the past few years. And I'm very encouraged by the level of community camaraderie that you've been able to bring to bear on this project, your concerns and the review that's currently underway at the Town of Southold Planning Board. So everyone, as you've heard, this is a case study of a project proposed more than 3 years ago. It's been undergoing review for quite some time. And about a year and change ago, a draft environmental impact statement was submitted and rejected. Now the planning board has put out a release of the developer's revised draft environmental impact statement, and that is now out for public review. So what I'm going to be doing for the rest of this, for my segment now, is talking about how members of the community can get involved in environmental review. And as Stephen and Ann pointed out, provide information regarding your perspectives to the planning board. So you're going to hear me say SEQRA or SEQR a lot. That is an acronym or an abbreviation for the State Environmental Quality Review Act. This is an act that was passed in New York State in 1975 on the heels of NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, which was passed in 1970 under the administration of Richard Nixon. In New York, under SEQRA, agencies, project sponsors, and citizens look at projects to find out if there are any adverse environmental impacts, what the alternatives to those to the project might be, and to examine mitigation for any impacts that the project might bring. Under SEQRA, agencies in New York must carry out the SEQRA provisions for any actions that they either undertake themselves, approve, or fund. For instance, if a park department wanted to put in a new dock out over tidal wetlands, that would be a project they might be undertaking themselves. They would have to undertake as well a SEQRA review. If there was an agency that was going to give out public funds for a project that might have adverse impacts on the environment, again, they have to undertake SEQRA review. And in this case, the planning board has to approve a project before it can be built. And in that case, they have to undertake a SEQRA review. So the stage we're at right now is sort of the middle of the project. There's a lot of stuff that happens with SEQRA review in the early stages that is the responsibility of the lead agency. They have to find out basically whether this project has a likelihood of having an adverse impact on the environment. They have to notify other agencies that might be involved in also giving approvals. It's a complex procedure that they have to go through. And this has already been done. But at a certain point, they had to decide whether or not there was at least one adverse environmental impact on the environment that could be considered significant. And if that were the case, a draft environmental impact statement would need to be prepared. And that's where we are right now. As I mentioned before, a draft environmental impact statement, or a DEIS, has been released to the public now for review, and your input is invited and will be vital. You can look at this environmental impact statement by going to the link that is in the slide, which we also will provide in chat, and you can copy it and use it later. We also will send out that link in our later communications with you, as well as when we send out the recording of this webinar. If you don't want to look at it digitally, you can, and if you're local to the North Fork, you can actually see the paper version of it at the Mattituck Laurel Public Library, the Cutchogue Public Library, or the Southold Public Library. I wanted to point out that there are other opportunities for public review in the SEQRA review process. One of them was passed, and that was when a process called scoping takes place. And that's when the lead agency asks the public to join them in trying to forecast what sorts of things should be included in a draft environmental impact statement that aren't already prescribed to be in such a statement by state law. So there might be other things that the state law didn't anticipate. What are those things, and what should the DEIS cover? That took place back in 2020, and that's when I met Stephen and Ann, and that's when Save Mattituck Inlet started to get going with its own community organizing. But at this point now, 3 years later, this revised draft environmental impact statement is now out for public review. And this is the most robust part of the public review process. This is when we need the most number of people to get involved, the greatest number of eyes on the document, and the greatest amount of commentary to come back to the planning board. And this is the best place to do it. On May 15th at 6:01, after the Pledge of Allegiance, they will begin a public hearing on the review of this draft environmental impact statement. So to remember, the hearing itself is about the document. Certainly it's about the project, but it's to review the document and get commentary in on how well it is doing its job. So this is the place to be, and we hope we will see you there. I'd like to point out that when you're looking at a draft environmental impact statement, you might feel, well, I'm not an environmental scientist. I'm not a water quality expert. Perhaps you might feel that you're not an engineer, and there's engineering in here, and it's a little daunting to look at. You do not need to be an environmental professional or a scientist to review a draft environmental impact statement. You already are an expert because you live here. You're an expert in things that really matter to the community. If you're on the North Fork and the sorts of things that Stephen and Ann were talking about are of concern to you, you are an expert. If you live next door to this project, you're already an expert. Believe it or not, the state law, SEQRA, anticipates and covers topics like community character. So if there are changes to a community's look or its elements that have an environmental aspect, those are appropriately handled under this law, and commentary on them is perfectly acceptable and welcomed. Another aspect of that might be how things look to you, a view shed. So perhaps you're used to looking out over a landscape in a certain way, and that might change. Is that a good change? Or would you consider that to be an adverse impact? That's something that you can comment on, and you have every right to do that. You already are an expert on how things are in your community. Before I go too much further, I want you to know that we're also going to be sending out a handout after this with the recording of this webinar that will have this material on it. And you can have this by your side when you review the DEIS. But there are some definitions. You may hear me say them today. Certainly when we have Q&A later, if you need me to repeat something or define something, I'd be happy to. But these are some key definitions under the state law that come into play as we're reviewing a draft environmental impact statement. And I'll just leave us on this slide just for a moment so you can see the sorts of things. There is a lot of jargon in the law, but we're at the point in the review process right now where the public's input is most important. And I'd like to make this as simple as possible so that you understand you have every right to be part of this review, and that you'll be able to come and express your concerns to the planning board. So we hope you'll come to the public hearing. You can come, perhaps you want to find out what your neighbors are thinking, or people in the next town. We know that this project is in the town of Southold, but we've also been talking to people in the town of Riverhead, right next door, also on the North Fork, who are concerned about this because they're recognizing that there are potential regional aspects and regional impacts of this project. You may have a unique perspective on this. Do you want to hear what your neighbors have to say? Perhaps you want to hear what other environmental groups have to say. Come to the hearing. Come prepared to speak if you like, or come prepared just to listen. If you don't want to speak, but you want to have your opinions heard, you can hand your comments in. You can do both. And you also may want to feel that you might care to revise your comments after you've heard other people speak. And you'll have an opportunity to do that because after the public hearing, there will be an extended comment period. And as far as we know now, that will be extended to July 10th. So here's some things to consider while you're looking at a DEIS. First of all, I would recommend that you look at the table of contents and see if there are topics there that are of interest to you or where you do have expertise. If you do have expertise in any of these particular topics that were mandated to be covered either by the state law or by the planning board because of the particular aspects of this project, that's something that would be really good for you to point out in your commentary. Give your credentials, talk about your experience and why you're an expert if you are in one of those topic areas. But again, if you're not an expert, understand that the SEQRA as a law was meant to be producing information for the public to digest and comment on in the vernacular. It's supposed to be in plain language. It's supposed to be a document that we can read and understand and make a decision on. And here's the key point. The draft environmental impact statement is a tool for the planning board to make a decision. Is this a good tool? If you were a planning board member, would you be able to look at this document and come to a conclusion? Remember who the planning board members are. In most towns in New York State, planning board members are members of the public that have been appointed to represent the community. Why? Why do we have lay people doing this? Because they live here. They live in the community and they have a vested concern in the future of the community, for their families, for their businesses, for their children, their grandchildren. This is a place they care about. Now they have a tool, a draft environmental impact statement, that they need to use to make a critically important decision on something that could affect their community. Back to you. Does this do the job? Is this a good tool? If you were a planning board member and you were looking at this document, would you find it has enough information in it for you to make a good decision? And here are some of the questions you might ask yourself as you're doing that deliberation. And these are the kinds of questions you can comment on when you either send in comments or speak up before the planning board. So, can a rational decision be made using this document? And if not, should the planning board decide that they can't make a rational decision using this document and they should prepare their own final environmental impact statement? That is fully within their rights under the law. If that's the case, then why would they have a developer do the draft environmental impact statement when clearly a developer has his or her own interests in mind and might provide information that some people would find biased or slanted? Well, the reason the state law allows that to happen is because there's an expectation, and it's probably a realistic one, that the developer is the best person to know what the project is that's being proposed, clearly, and knows what the property is, because it's their property, and might be the best person, because they have access to the property, to describe the property. So they get the first shot at preparing the document that's out for public review. But under New York state law, it's the lead agency, which in this case is the planning board, which is responsible for the preparation of the final environmental impact statement. It's up to the lead agency to have a document in hand that will be good for helping them. It will be the tool they would use to come up with their findings. And they have to produce a findings statement later that says that they've reviewed all the information, they've reviewed the comments that came in from the public, they've heard the responses from the developer, and they've able to come to a reasoned conclusion. And they put that in the findings statement along with their decision. So as you're preparing your comments, you may want to keep in mind the people who are reviewing your comments. This particular project is getting a lot of publicity. We're expecting there will be a lot of people weighing in on this. Some people have spent a couple of years writing their comments. Some have just really put their head down recently and tore through it and have pages and pages of things to say to the planning board. That doesn't mean you have to do the same thing, but you may want to keep in mind that there will be a lot for the planning department to review. And so we would suggest that you prepare your comments in the most readable manner possible. So you might use bullet points, you might use headlines, you separate your comments out into topic areas, make them punchy, make them pop off the page, make it as easy as possible for the reviewers to read them and get your powerful points up in the beginning. You could do the same thing if you're preparing your oral comments. As we all know, if we've been at public hearings, there's either time frames, so that they may say all comments are limited to 3 minutes, for instance, or they may only do that after everybody gets a little bit tired. And some of your neighbors have been able to talk at length, and now it's your turn and you've only got a few minutes left. So remember, keep it punchy, keep it highly understandable, and give the planning board some help. And use that unique perspective of yours. Think about too, are there any regional impacts that you would need to be considering as you review this project for its local potential impacts? And here's another trick. The document is broken up into sections by topic, but we all know that one thing is connected to another thing. It's going to be up to us to make some of those connections. For instance, there will be a topic area on water quality and measures by the developer to protect water quality. There may be another topic in another part of the document about climate change and sea level rise. And it's quite possible that a document like this, the preparers were different people. The people who were doing climate change for the developer were not the same people who were writing the sections on water quality. So there may not be any cross play in the document where maybe there should be. Is it possible, for instance, that sea level rise is going to affect the stormwater collection system on the property? That's up to us to look at. That's an example of the cross play that we need to look at in a draft environmental impact statement. It's not only up to us, of course. There are environmental experts that work for the lead agency have to do that as well, but we can help them. One more thing that I'm particularly excited about. Those of you who are in New York State who are watching this know that in November 2021, there was a referendum on Election Day for the Green Amendment. This was an amendment to our New York State Constitution that gave us all a new constitutional right. Each person in New York shall have a right to clean air and water and a healthful environment. That exact language is in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 19. This has changed things for all of us. We've never had an environmental civil right in the state of New York before. And there's a lot of people wondering if this is going to have an impact on SEQRA reviews. Does this now have to be considered as part of environmental review under SEQRA? Should it be? Is this something we as citizens would want to bring into environmental review under SEQRA? How are the environmental agencies going to consider this? And who's going to be responsible for protecting this new civil right of ours? Is there going to be a lawsuit in the future or new case law developed that brings our new constitutional right into play with regard to SEQRA decisions made by lead agencies? We don't know, but this is something for us all to think about as we consider the environment we care so deeply about and that we care so much about. So this ends a brief primer on, and hopefully some encouragement to get involved in environmental review of this project and other projects that come our way. It's a great case study. It's getting a lot of attention. We hope that you will be involved. And there's one last thing I didn't say before, which is if you feel that this project or any project has adverse environmental impacts that affect more than your local community, remember that we have a Suffolk County Planning Commission as well. And being in touch with that department, the Suffolk County Planning Department, letting them know that you feel a particular project has regional impacts is important because they too advise the planning boards in the localities, and they need to hear from you as well. So we're ready to take questions if you have any, and I'll ask Stephen and Ann to come back on camera and we'll pick up. Thank you very much, everybody. And Kathy's going to read the questions out to us. Kathy?
Sure, I can do that. The first one is really a comment. Susan Reeve says, I am familiar with the inlet from fishing and the length of it for many years, as well as having grown up only a few miles west of the inlet. I also have had and will have a boat at a neighboring marina. The inlet is amazing with the variety of animals that live in it and around it. The mature forest is vital to the continuation of the health of all creatures in the area of the waterway. To destroy it further than it already has been destroyed would be criminal, in my opinion. Why can't their storage facilities be done somewhere further away? It will destroy not only the environment, it will destroy the human residents' peace as well. The sound is already sick enough. This will be just another nail in its coffin. So if any of you would like to respond to Susan's comment.
I'll start by talking about alternatives. SEQRA requires a review of feasible alternatives to the proposed action. And in this case, the town planning board did ask the developer to evaluate alternative sites among other alternatives with regard to this project. So among the alternatives were scaling down the project. Another alternative was doing it at another location that the project proponent owns. Another, I think, was to put it, is to not do the excavation, but to put the storage buildings up on top of the hill. So in other words, these were things that the developer had to look at. And under the law, an examination of feasible alternatives is always required, including the law says every project has to be evaluated for what's called the no action alternative as well. So if we did nothing, would there be any adverse environmental impacts from doing nothing? And sometimes, in some cases, in some places, the no action alternative is viewed as a conservation alternative, an alternative of acquiring and protecting open space. That wasn't required in this review, but it often is.
Great, thanks, Louise. And then Nancy says she's going to be away the week of May 15th and can't go to the public hearing, but she does want to send in a written concern. And her question is whether there's a maximum word count that the written statement should be.
There's no limitations.
Great, that was easy. And finally, John says, I did stop by the Strong's presentation yesterday after checking out both the current site and also the Strong's Peconic site. I was told Strong's has multiple marinas on both forks. Why is this project so big and complicated being proposed at this site?
I'm not sure we know the answer. What do you want to address that, Stephen?
Yeah, I don't think we know. I think the developers just proposed, the maximum project that would fit within the confines of that particular area. And I think he's just going for, whatever he can. I still haven't really gotten an explanation as to, is there documented demand for it? And that's what's driving the size. We don't think there is documented demand for it. Some of the information we've received would lead us to believe that this is more of a speculative development, sort of a, if you build it, they will come, which is a big gamble, when you're talking about disrupting that much of the environment.
There's also a suggestion that the value of the sand that's being removed is a key factor in locating this project here. So that's, there's more to say about that, but I would say that could be another reason.
John actually had a follow-up question about that sand. He said also Strong said they will only receive 10% of money for this project from the sand it will sell. And he says, how do they know this, as sand is the new gold out here, especially 7,500 truckloads? And then he has one last question. I saw the old mill is being fully gutted. Will this be part of Strong's project?
Right. So on the sand, they do know, I'm sure, that 134,000 cubic yards of very clean sand will go for a very high dollar figure. At one of the last presentations, the developer said that this project will be at least $7 million, though given the price of steel and interest rates, he actually doesn't know what the final cost could be if and when he would ever end up building the buildings after they've excavated the cliffside. So, estimates are out there for the sand between, 2 and 5 million. It's a little hard for people to price out wholesale sand when you're not an active seller, I suppose, in the market. But there is a lot of value in the sand. And on the question about the old mill, that's owned by a separate owner. They're completely independent projects, and so it's not going to be part of the Strong's project.
Great, thanks, Stephen. We also have a question from Jane, who says she just scheduled a paddle for a group of people for Mattituck Creek. She hasn't been there before, and she says, I'm looking forward to a nice environmental experience, but she wants to know whether this project will affect that experience, if at all. The paddle will be on June 4th, and she says, I expect nothing will be done by that time. Is that correct?
That's correct. This project has a long way to go. First of all, comments on the draft environmental impact statement will be collected until we think at least July 10th. And then comes the time when all of those comments have to be read and evaluated. Then the planning staff on the planning board will deliver the substantive concerns they have that are encapsulated in those comments back to the project proponent, back to the developer for responses. And at that point, the developer will have a chance to respond to the comments. After that, the planning department is going to decide whether or not the responses to the comments are adequate, and whether at that point they have enough information to make a decision about the project. If they do, they will take all the responses to the comments and put them together with the comments and the DEIS and call that the final environmental impact statement. If they feel that they still don't have enough good information to make a decision, at that point, the planning board can decide to prepare its own final environmental impact statement, and that will make the process take even longer. So my shorter answer to you is enjoy the inlet. I hope you have a great paddle and great weather.
Great. Okay. And we're coming up on 7 o'clock. So we have just one more question, which comes from Sharon. She's asking whether the yachts will be launched into the inlet. And she's pointing to a concern about toxic paint on the bottom of the yachts, which could be dangerous for the cleanliness of the water. She adds, perhaps the paint is not toxic after dry, but it certainly would chip off potentially.
So one of the issues, and bottom paints on boats have gotten a little better over the years, but you do still need a pesticide applicator's license to apply bottom paint to a boat, for what it's worth. The larger concern is not so much painting the bottom of a boat and putting it in the water. It's more of in the winter time when you haul the boat. When you haul the boat, you pressure wash the bottom, and that gets some of the barnacles and some of the, the growth off the bottom of the boat, and the paint does then typically will come off, or portions of the paint will come off. And one of the biggest concerns as far as water goes is, health of the creek is, as you power wash those boats, there's no catch basin. And so that just goes into either into a dry well right below the lift where the travel lift where the boats come out, or it just runs right out of the parking lot and goes right into the creek. And so the bigger concern would really be more on the winter side when the boats are getting hauled. And this marina only holds about 45 boats, I believe, in the water. So how they would stage these boats for hauling and launching at the beginning and end of the season is still a bit of a mystery, adding that much traffic to the creek, but also adding that much, that's 88 60-foot boats. So if you add that up in linear footage, that's how much power washing and length of bottom paint would be sort of running off into the creek.
And then a quick follow-up, would the inlet need to be dredged deeper to accommodate the yachts?
For what's being proposed, I don't think so. 60-foot yachts they're 60-foot boats are not typically something in the 200-foot range. These boats probably draw or need a depth of about, I'd say on average, 4 to 5 feet, and they can access the creek at this moment. I don't know if things would change and potentially later on might need to be, but at the moment they can access this area.
There is an interest in dredging the waterway. It's a federally maintained navigable channel up at the inlet, up at the mouth, and I believe it goes all the way down the creek. And there's silt at the southern end of the creek where this same project proponent has another marina. that they would like to have that silt removed. And there are some other people who'd like to see the channel maintained better up at the north end, which is slightly north of his project site. So those talks are going on separately. But of course, things like that cost money, and you have to get the Army Corps involved. And there's many considerations with that, but it wouldn't be part of this project. It might benefit the project, but it isn't necessarily part of it, and the project's not dependent on it.
Great, thank you. And I'll just add that if there are any further questions, we'll be sure to get back to people after the webinar is over, but we're past 7 o'clock.
Well, I appreciate everybody coming on and talking with us tonight, listening for your questions. I've really loved working with Save Mattituck Inlet. Save the Sound will also be providing comments on this project at the public hearing and perhaps afterwards as well. And we hope to see you all there. We will take your questions afterwards if there's any remaining questions. And please stay in touch. Thanks, Kathy, for helping us with this webinar. And good night to everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.